The day my first love got engaged to someone else, I was in a plane crash. The person who came to collect my body was Mark, whom I once called a jerk. He dropped everything and chose to commit suicide, to go to hell with me. In my new life, I knocked on Mark's door in the heavy rain. In his astonished eyes, I grabbed his sleeve and said, "Mark, can we get married?" The man's eyes suddenly turned red, but he shook my hand off indifferently. Is it fun to play tricks on me? That night, I was shivering in the rain. Mark opened the door with a murderous look on his face, sighed and pulled me into his arms. "Nancy, I'm your fucking dog." When I opened my eyes again, I was awakened by a cool breeze. I got up and closed the window. The weather has just begun to turn to autumn, and I have returned to the time before my first love Frank got engaged. My phone rang several times. It was a message from Frank. "Nancy, I'm having dinner with Jane tonight, why don't you come over too? I know you feel uncomfortable, but I have decided to marry her. We will have to meet each other in the future, and I don't want the relationship between the two most important people in my life to become so strained. Please give me a favor and have dinner together tonight, okay?" Looking at the messages popping up on my phone, I sneered. In my previous life, I had always been devoted to Frank. He promised me that we would get married after graduating from college. I never worried that Frank would break his promise. Because I know that with our childhood love, he will marry me one day. But later, a girl named Jane appeared in Frank's life. She always likes to tease Frank, often making him blush. I would also kiss his cheek when he is angry and say, "You are so cute." I watched Frank fall step by step. He said that after Jane appeared, he finally understood what it felt like to be in love. He said she was his light and his salvation. He also said that he would never marry anyone except Jane in his life. He forgot everything he had promised me and cruelly and decisively made me accept the reality. In my previous life, I was on a business trip in Los Angeles on the day he and Jane got engaged. When I heard the news, I was devastated. I immediately turned down all my work and bought a plane ticket to rush back home. Maybe it was God's will that I couldn't stop them from getting together. That day, the plane I was on crashed. At the moment the cabin was falling rapidly, I felt more regretful. I don't think I should die like this. What I am even more unwilling to accept is that I lost my life in vain for a man who didn't care about me. After I died, my soul has been wandering around the place where the plane crashed. The media reported the incident as soon as possible. The only person who came to collect my body was Mark, the person I hated the most. He rushed to the scene with red eyes. He let his hands dig into the ground until it was bloody, but he still refused to stop. Mark kept calling my name. The overwhelming grief made his eyes go dark and he passed out. Later, he committed suicide by taking pills in his villa. When they were found, the best time for rescue had already passed. The suicide note in the study only had one sentence. "Don't be afraid, Nancy, I'm here with you." Maybe Mark's obsession was too deep, and I came back to life again. Feeling the fresh breath, I just felt like it's been a long time. This time, I decided to take advantage of Mark. This man who once gave his life to me. He loved me so much, but I was blind in my previous life and let him down. Thinking of this, I opened the chat interface on my phone. Replied to Frank with a short message. "I have no objection to who you marry, just don't contact me anymore." After sending this, I quickly turned off my phone. It was getting dark outside the window. At this time, Mark should have finished get off work. When I changed my clothes and went out, the weather news was on TV. Starting from 18:30 tonight, there will be heavy rainfall in the city. Please bring rain gear when you go out. I didn't care and turned off the TV. When I got off the taxi, it started to drizzle. I searched for Mark's address in the villa area based on my memory. In my previous life, I only heard him mention it once. When I reached the door, I swallowed nervously. Then, he raised his hand and pressed the doorbell. Even when I heard that Frank and Jane were engaged in my previous life, my heart had never beaten so fast. This is the first time I've met Mark after so many years. The doorbell rang several times before footsteps were heard from inside. When we opened the door, Mark and I looked at each other. He was wearing a gray home suit, and his black hair made him look a little cute. Seeing that it was me at the door, his eyes jumped. "Nancy?" Under his gaze, my face gradually turned red. It was raining heavily, and drops of rain were hitting the steps under my feet. I took a deep breath and grabbed Mark's sleeves as he looked at me in astonishment. "Mark, can we get married?" The air suddenly became quiet. Mark's eyes suddenly turned red. He looked at me steadily, as if trying to read something from my face. After a long while, Mark finally laughed at himself. "Nancy, is it fun to play tricks on me?" He turned to leave, but I pulled him back again. When I met Mark's indifferent eyes, I just felt extremely uncomfortable. So this is what it feels like to be ignored. That's how I treated him in the past. I once called Mark a jerk. I once cried hysterically in front of him, begging him not to appear in my life again. Mark must have felt very uncomfortable at that time. But I was still feeling sad for Frank and my mind was focused on another man. I deserve to die. Thinking of this, my eyes became more determined. Mark, I know you don't believe me right now. But regarding marriage, I am sincere and I want to be with you. Mark's eyes deepened and he lowered his eyelids. The moment I closed the door, I heard Mark's cold voice. It's raining, let's go back early. Mark locked me out like this. The heavy rain roared and hit me in protest. I tried my best to move inside, but half of my body was still wet. In the early autumn weather, the rain brings a chilly chill. I stood there, not moving a step. Closing the door, Mark forced himself to go to the study to continue working. He has been doing this for 2 days in a row. The project had reached its final stages, and he had to keep an eye on it. But the woman outside the door made him upset and unable to concentrate. She suddenly came to him today and said she wanted to get married, which really scared him. In the past, Nancy would never say such words. At one point, Mark thought he was lovesick and was hallucinating. But seeing her determined eyes, Mark couldn't help but be moved. He hardened his heart and forced himself to stop caring about her. 10 minutes passed. The surveillance on the computer showed that she had not left yet. Even though she was shivering with cold, she still waited stubbornly for him to come out. It's so persistent. Mark shook his head helplessly, but finally relented. He went to the bathroom to get a large clean towel and walked quickly to the entrance. I was standing at the door, shivering all over with cold. Just when I thought Mark would ignore me, the door opened. A clean towel quickly blocked my view. Then, I felt myself being pulled into a warm embrace. Mark's hoarse voice sounded in my ears. Nancy, I'm your fucking dog. I clearly decided not to like you anymore, but I can't control my heart. My heart trembled violently and I opened my mouth to say something. The next second, she was picked up by the man and the rain was blocked outside the door. Mark put me on the bathroom sink. His eyes were cold, take a shower first. After saying that, he went to the bedroom and got me a set of men's pajamas. This is new and has not been worn. Come out quickly after washing. Watching him busying around, I nodded obediently. Mark closed the bathroom door. I looked at the furnishings in the bathroom and it was obvious that no woman had ever been here. This realization makes me inexplicably excited. When I dried my hair and walked out, Mark was sitting in the study looking through some documents. Seeing me come out, he waved for me to come over. Drink this. Mark raised his hand and handed me the cold medicine. The cup was still warm, and I drank it all in one gulp. Mark always has endless patience with me. Why couldn't I see his good side before? By the way, this is the first time I see Mark working seriously. He is completely different from the impression I had of him. I hesitated for a moment, thinking that I might as well not disturb him for the time being. As I was walking towards the living room, Mark stopped me. Are you serious about what you just said? I turned around and found Mark looking at me too. His dark eyes showed no emotion. I'm serious. I answered like this. As he finished speaking, his eyelashes trembled. Feeling the hesitation emanating from Mark, my heart ached. The next second, I walked to Mark's side. She held his hand tightly in his blank eyes. I mean every word I say today. Mark, I want to marry you, is that okay? This was the first time I proposed to a man, and I felt inexplicably nervous. Even the way he looked at Mark became a little cautious. He looked at me with his peach blossom eyes, as if he was afraid that all this was fake. Nancy, prove it to me, prove that you want to marry me. How do you want to prove it? After he finished speaking, the man's Adam's apple rolled. Kiss me. I didn't say anything, just looked at Mark quietly. There was a possessiveness towards me and a hint of fear in his eyes. He was panicking, afraid that I was just acting on impulse. The next second, without a second thought, I leaned over and kissed him on the lips. Just as expected. Mark's lips are soft and kissable. Mark seemed to sense my initiative and was a little bit unbelieving. I took a step forward and kissed him, and he gently took a step back. If he took a step back, I would pursue him without hesitation. After feeling my determination, Mark sighed and took the initiative. He pulled me onto his lap and showered me with kisses. Late at night, emotions stir. Mark carried me to the bedroom. His hoarse voice was particularly sexy in the middle of the night. Nancy, it's not too late for you to regret now. I didn't say anything, but just gently unbuttoned his clothes. I showed Mark with my actions that I had no regrets. There was a strong possessiveness in his eyes. Nancy, I will die on you. I buried myself in his arms shyly. After all the trouble, I finally fell asleep from exhaustion. When I woke up the next morning, Mark was gone. I walked into the living room and saw a prepared breakfast on the dining table. There was a pink sticky note stuck to it. Nancy, get up and remember to eat breakfast. I have an important meeting this morning. I'll come back to pick you up after I'm done and we'll go get the certificate. When I saw the words get the certificate, I couldn't help blushing. Mark is really efficient. Get married when you say you will, without any delay. I sat down in a good mood and ate the fried eggs Mark made for me. When I thought of him, the corners of my lips curled up slightly. While it was still early, I hailed a car and went straight home. I bought this house a few years ago. Although it's not big, it can be considered a home in this city. When I went downstairs with my ID, Mark was waiting for me in the car. I'll call a moving company later to move all your stuff to my place. He buckled my seatbelt expertly, his tone leaving no room for doubt. Seeing that I nodded in agreement, Mark chuckled. He suddenly came closer and looked at me with his peach blossom eyes. Are you ready to be Mrs. Mark? My heart skipped a beat. Why didn't I realize before that Mark loves playing tricks on people? I pursed my lips and kissed Mark on the lips without hesitation. The man's smile suddenly froze, and a suspicious blush appeared on his fair face. Mark coughed twice and returned to his seat. Sitting in the passenger seat, my smile gradually grew. A romantic guy like Mark is so easy to handle. After completing a series of procedures, Mark seemed to be at peace. He held my hand and called me his wife over and over again. I responded to him over and over again. Mark's eyes turned from joy to redness. At the moment of tears, he kissed my lips passionately. From now on, you are mine. Nancy, do you know how happy I am? Do you know how happy I am? I know. During those dark days, he was always watching me silently from behind. Watch me cry, watch me laugh, watch me chase another man. Now, it's my turn to love him well. Late at night, after I came out of the shower, I turned on my cell phone. There were dozens of missed calls, all from Frank. The latest piece of information just now. Nancy, are you hiding from me? Tell me where you are. I rubbed my brows with a headache and planned to tell him about the marriage. I heard footsteps behind me and Mark picked me up. I screamed and my phone accidentally fell on the bed. The man chuckled and didn't care. Wife, it's late, time to go to bed. The next second, his lips covered mine. Mark seemed particularly anxious tonight. The words I spoke were swallowed up in the kiss. As they were making love, the clear sound of a cell phone ring filled the entire bedroom. Mark pretended not to hear and kissed her even deeper. I was a little anxious and wanted to answer the phone. But Mark grabbed my chin in a domineering manner and forced me to accept him. Nancy, pay attention, okay? But the bell rang and stopped and rang again. There is a tendency to keep calling if you don't answer. After a long moment, Mark cursed inwardly. With an unsatisfied look on his face, he took my cell phone from the end of the bed. When Mark saw the two big words Frank, his face darkened. The tone was also much colder than before. Looking for yours. I looked at Mark and pressed the answer button. The voice on the other end of the phone was more urgent than I expected. Nancy, I know you are angry with me, can you please stop being angry? I haven't been able to contact you these 2 days and I'm very worried. Are you home? Can I come to you now? I pursed my lips in no need, I'm not home now. Frank immediately responded. It's so late, where else could you be if not at home? I'm here with Mark. The air suddenly became quiet. Frank's incredulous voice came from the receiver. How could you? Before I could say anything, I felt the air around me get several degrees colder. Mark raised his eyes slightly and said lightly. Nancy, didn't you tell him that we were married? Looking at Mark's slightly disappointed eyes, my heart tightened. Subconsciously, I wanted to explain to Mark. No, I just wanted to tell him. I couldn't hear any response from him, but Frank kept calling me on the other end of the phone. Mark's eyes darkened and he kissed my slightly open lips without hesitation. Nancy, let me tell you something. What method should be used to defeat the love rival? Frank was originally very anxious. He had imagined 10,000 reasons why he could not accept it. Why is Nancy at Mark's place so late at night? But when he heard a slight gasp from the other end of the phone, Frank was struck by lightning. Them. At that moment, Frank felt as if his world had collapsed. He once thought that as long as he looked back, Nancy would always be waiting for him there. But now, she is in the arms of another man. She doesn't like him anymore. This realization made Frank tremble all over and his blood froze in one place. The next second, he heard Mark's voice on the other end of the phone. Remember next time not to disturb our married life so late at night. Frank, don't you have a wife yourself? After saying this, Mark hung up the phone decisively. But Frank was still in shock for a long time. Nancy and Mark got married. No way, this is impossible. Nancy clearly hated Mark so much before. She obviously felt disgusted if she looked at Mark for even one more moment. Why marry him now? The more Frank thought about it, the more upset he became, so he simply swept everything on the table to the floor. Inside the villa's bedroom. After a lot of trouble, Mark held me in his arms and said nothing. I felt a little flustered, but I still propped myself up and looked at him. There was a feeling in Mark's eyes that I couldn't understand. I leaned over and slowly smoothed his frown. Mark, are you unhappy? The man's eyes moved slightly, and his hands around my waist tightened. Nancy, you still like Frank, right? Mark's words made my eyes suddenly red. No, I really don't like him anymore. I was just about to talk to him, but I didn't expect you to interrupt me. Mark, you are the one in my heart now. Mark looked at me. After a long time, he finally smiled. Okay, I got it. The more he did this, the more flustered I felt. I would rather Mark scold me or vent his emotions to me. Unfortunately, he didn't. I went forward and hugged his neck. Husband, can you believe me? Despite the sweet words, Mark still couldn't stand the onslaught. He hugged me lovingly. I trust you. Nancy, I just care about you too much. I greedily hope that you will always be mine. His eyes were red, and he held my hand to his lips tenderly and kissed it gently. I know it all. His fear and vulnerability were all revealed to me. All I can do is give him a sense of security. My married life with Mark is happier than I imagined. He never comes into contact with the opposite sex and has a strong sense of propriety. Even a small word from me can be kept in his heart. My friends all say that I am lucky to have a husband like this. To the extent that I watched Mark busy in the kitchen wearing an apron, and suddenly it felt unreal. Walking into the kitchen, I hugged Mark from behind. He paused while cutting vegetables and chuckled again. You seem to be particularly sticky to me these 2 days. After saying this, the corners of his lips slightly raised. It's a good thing. I tightened my hands around Mark's waist, feeling a little distressed. If this makes you happy too, I will do more of it in the future. Mark's back stiffened for a moment and he turned around. His eyes darkened and he looked at me with his peach blossom eyes. Really, will you love me more and more? Mark was like a cautious child at this moment, trying to please others. I hugged his neck and stood on tiptoes to place a kiss on his forehead. Yes, Mark, I will love you more and more. Mark's eyes darkened and he placed a gentle kiss. A touch of warmth. On Friday night, Mark was out socializing. I originally planned to go home, take a shower, watch TV series, and wait for Mark to come back. Unexpectedly, I received an invitation to a high school reunion when I was getting off work. This party was initiated by our high school class monitor. When I arrived at the dining area, Frank was standing at the door waiting for me. He looked delighted to see me coming. I didn't intend to pay attention to him and just walked past him. Unexpectedly, Frank eagerly grabbed my arm. Nancy, are you really married to Mark? Tell me, this is fake, right? You obviously hated Mark the most in high school, so why did you marry him? Frank's words sounded like a question, but also like he was talking to himself. He had a forced smile on his face, waiting for my answer. I shook my hands and took a step back. Do you think I need to lie to you? Why? Because I love him. As soon as he finished speaking, I saw Frank's eyes turned red instantly. No way, you can't love him. You clearly said that you would marry me after you graduated from college. Nancy, look at me, the person you love is me, right? Frank's eyes were bloodshot and he grabbed my shoulders hard. I frowned in pain, and Frank finally let me go as if waking up from a dream. Frank, who was the first to break our vows? Need I say more? Did it never happen that you and Jane were going to get married? Or do you want both me and Jane? I tell you, you'd better give up on this idea. Seeing my firm tone, he hesitated to speak. I glanced at him and walked forward. Frank's voice came from behind. Jane and I have broken up. I was bewildered before and hurt your heart. Nancy, I regret this now. You and Mark divorce, and we can get back together, okay? I sneered but didn't stop. Why does Frank think that as long as he looks back, I can always wait for him here? Everything he did now was just the result of his ridiculous possessiveness. When I loved him with all my heart, he felt confident. So you can love others passionately. When I turned around and married Mark, Frank couldn't stand it. He couldn't stand others invading his territory and taking his things. To put it bluntly, in Frank's eyes, I am just an insignificant object. But Mark loves me with everything he has. He is fragile and sensitive. I would never hurt him again for Frank. The first time I met Mark was in my sophomore year of high school. After school, I helped the teacher mark test papers. When I came out of the teaching building, the sunset in the sky was just right. On the other side of the basketball court stood a dirty boy. He was as worn out as a stray dog on the roadside, with his eyes lowered as he was being scolded by his father. I paused. Although it was far away, the middle-aged man's shouting and cursing was unbearable to hear. The young man had an indifferent expression and didn't even lift his eyelids. The next second, the middle-aged man slapped the boy hard in the face. "You bastard, don't think that just because your mother is gone, you have the right to do whatever you want. If you cause trouble in school again, I won't forgive you." After he finished speaking, the middle-aged man quickly disappeared from my sight. Wherever I looked, I saw the boy curled up and squatted down. I didn't say anything and walked quickly towards the school gate. With every step I took, it felt like something was calling me from behind. I held on to the shoulder straps of my school bag tightly and finally stopped. I walked up to the boy and handed him a clean handkerchief. "There's blood at the corner of your mouth. Are you okay?" At that time, Mark looked up at me for the first time. I was stunned. Those were a pair of very clean and clear eyes. He took the handkerchief and said thank you. I later learned that Mark's mother died when he was very young. He was extremely rebellious during his adolescence, and even refused anyone to enter his world. Even so, every time Mark was called to the police station as a parent, his father would still rush to the school and apologize to the teacher with his head down. Since then, there has been a little tale behind me that I can't get rid of. Mark always follows me silently and takes me home. He would also stand up for me and fight for me when I was bullied. During that time, the rumor in school was that Mark liked me. I finally couldn't stand it anymore. One time, I stopped Mark in the dead of night. "Just tell me what you want." At that time, Mark chuckled, with a bitter smile. "Nancy, all I ever wanted was you. What about you, can you give?" That day, I cursed Mark as a pervert. I cried and begged him to stop following me and stop appearing in my world. I said, "Mark, you really make me sick." As they looked at each other, the light in Mark's eyes gradually faded. Later, I started avoiding him and creating opportunities to be with Frank as much as possible. However, even Frank couldn't ignore Mark's presence. That's why he promised me that we would get married right after graduation. At that time, I looked at Mark hiding in the light and shadow. Very deliberately and loudly agreed to Frank. And Mark never appeared in front of me again. Pulling myself away from my memories, I was already standing at the door of the box. When I pushed the door open, the scene was very lively. Frank and I went in one after another, and everyone greeted me warmly. My former desk mate Henry pulled me over to sit down. Everyone was talking at once, but most of the conversation was just polite greetings. "Nancy, you have been so low-key these years. You are never present at any of our gatherings. Yes, please get together with us more often, we are old classmates." I chuckled, busy with work. If Henry hadn't kept urging me this time, I naturally wouldn't have come. I never like this kind of occasion. Frank has been chatting with the monitor since he entered the box. His eyes would fall on me from time to time, making me feel a little uncomfortable. Sat there for about 10 minutes. I picked up my purse and went to the bathroom. While I was putting on makeup, my cell phone rang with a message. "Mark, Nancy, do you hang out near the office?" "Me, how do you know?" By the way, I sent Mark a puzzled expression. I got a quick reply. "I installed a positioning system in your phone." I twitched my lips. This man wants to keep track of my whereabouts at all times. When we returned to the box, they were playing Truth or Dare. I sat next to Henry and watched them having fun. Unexpectedly, the next second, the bottle mouth on the table was suddenly pointed at me. Someone in the crowd asked, "Truth or Dare?" I pursed my lips and chose the adventure. Several active students immediately became excited. "So, you and Frank are standing face to face, with your arms around his neck. Say sweet nothings to him and kiss him on the cheek lovingly." As soon as he finished speaking, a burst of booing sound was heard. Everyone looked at Frank and me with mischievous expressions. Especially those people who usually get along well with Frank, the meaning in their eyes is more obvious. I frowned and denied it immediately. "Let's change it, I really can't do this." Frank's smile froze in an instant. Are you going to resist me so much even in games? I didn't say anything, and everyone started to talk to me. No way, Nancy, can't you afford to have fun? Hey, didn't you used to be with Frank? Yes, I also remember that you and Frank had a good relationship at that time. Did you break up? It's just a kiss on the cheek, there's no need to be so disappointing, right? Among those who mocked me, there were also some girls in my class. Henry was indignant on my behalf. Isn't that a bit too much? What if Nancy is married now? Wouldn't you be destroying someone else's family by making such a fuss? One of the girls rolled her eyes and you also said it was just a chance, so what if she didn't get married? Henry was so angry that his face turned red and his neck became thick. I patted her hand soothingly and looked at everyone. I am married. My husband is quite sensitive and he would be unhappy with this. After I finished speaking, all eyes in the box were focused on me. Frank's face turned blue and red. He stood up in shame and anger and suddenly pulled me up. Then he leaned close to my ear. Nancy, do you really have to embarrass me in front of so many people? I was stunned. Then Frank took my hands and placed them on his neck. I struggled, but he locked my hands tighter. Just when I was getting angry and embarrassed, the door of the box suddenly opened. Mark stood at the door with a stern look on his face, staring straight at Frank and me. Who are you? Some people in the crowd looked at Mark with displeasure. The next second, Mark gave him a cold look. This look is full of oppression. The originally noisy box suddenly became quiet. Mark stretched out his long legs, walked over to me and pulled me into his arms. He touched my red wrist with concern. Does it hurt? I shook my head and smiled at Mark. He ruffled the strands of hair on my forehead. I have a bad temper, and my biggest weakness is protecting my wife. Nancy is married now, so please be careful when socializing in the future. If you offend my wife like this again, I will let you know the consequences. Mark spoke, but his eyes were on Frank. The two men's eyes met in the air. Under the strong sense of oppression from Mark, Frank still looked away awkwardly. After saying that, Mark took my hand and left the box. Sitting in the passenger seat, I squeezed the seatbelt nervously. Although Mark had no expression on his face, he was driving very fast. I wanted to say something, but was ultimately scared back by his gloomy face. Late at night, Mark held me tightly in his arms. He pulled the quilt closer to me to make sure I wouldn't catch a cold. I sniffed. Mark, I want to tell you about tonight. It's okay, go to sleep. The words that were about to come out were interrupted softly. Mark kissed my forehead, his voice flat. I wanted to say something, but I could hear the sound of even breathing above my head. Forget it, let's talk about it tomorrow. I had a very long dream in which a man was chasing me. When I was startled awake, I subconsciously touched my side. But he woke up instantly when he touched the cold quilt. Mark wasn't with me. I was startled. Wearing slippers, he hurriedly opened the bedroom door. When we found Mark, he was sitting alone in the audiovisual room. There were no lights on inside, and even the movie was playing on silent mode. I fumbled to turn on the light and saw Mark, who looked disheveled and pitiful. He sat down on the carpet obediently. It seemed that he had maintained this posture for a long time. When he looked at me, his eyes were bloodshot. My heart skipped a beat and I walked over quickly. Can't sleep? Mark looked up at me, his voice a little hoarse. Why not turn on the sound? I'm afraid of disturbing you. I dropped my eyelids and took Mark's hand. In the past, Mark's big hands were always warm and dry. But tonight his hands were exceptionally cold. I took a blanket from the sofa and covered him with it with heartache. If you can't sleep next time, be sure to call me. Can I accompany you? Mark nodded obediently. Good. Nancy, I will do whatever you say. He held me in his arms. But his shoulders were shaking slightly. Mark, do you have anything to say to me? I leaned on his shoulder and patiently guided him. I knew for a long time that Mark had severe paranoia. Once he has taken someone into his territory, he will never let go easily. After a long while, Mark's trembling voice sounded. Nancy, I'm sorry. Although I know there's nothing between you and Frank, I still can't help being upset. Even seeing you standing together is unbearable to me. Before I got you, I thought that as long as you were willing to be with me, I would be willing to do anything. Later you married me, but I coveted your heart. I wanted your body and mind to belong to me. I know it's greedy of me to do this, but I really can't control myself from loving you. Every day I want it more than before, for you not to talk to any man in this world. I'm really afraid that this morbid love will scare you. After saying this, Mark choked up. His tears fell on my shoulders and burned my heart. Mark has always been a sensitive child. He lives in a dark world. He would be afraid of losing me, afraid of scaring me. Even though he was so unhappy about what happened tonight, he didn't dare to blame me. This kind of Mark really makes me feel bad. I stepped out of his arms and gently wiped Mark's tears. He looked at me cautiously, as if I were a child who had done something wrong. Nancy, please don't leave me, okay? As far as I can remember, Mark never cried even when he was slapped by his father. Such a man was so fragile that he cried in front of me. I looked at him and kissed him on the lips without hesitation. Mark was stunned for a moment, then opened his lips to let me go deeper. After the kiss, I played with Mark's messy hair. Mark, you can actually tell me. No matter what happens, whether you are happy or unhappy, I hope you can share it with me. From the day I came to find you, I was destined to be with you for the rest of my life. I will never give this kind of feeling to anyone again. So, you can ask me again and again. I will never tire of responding to you, I love you very much. After saying this, Mark's tears fell even more violently. He pulled me into his arms. Nancy, don't lie to me. If you lie to me, I'll go crazy. In the end, it is unclear who kissed whom first. Mark just tugged at my lips eagerly. It seems that only such strong possession can prove that I love him. An hour later, Mark carried me to the bathroom to take a shower. I'm extremely sleepy. He kissed my lips enthusiastically. Nancy, do you love me? At the same time, even if I am extremely sleepy, I will still cooperate and say, Mark, I love you so much. After getting the answer, Mark carried me back to the room. He continued to hold me in his arms and fell asleep contentedly. Time flies, and in a blink of an eye, Mark and I have been married for more than half a year. I've been feeling nauseous quite a lot lately. When the relatives did not come to visit, Mark took me to get checked out. When the results came out, a kind middle-aged female doctor was sitting in front of me. Congratulations, you are pregnant. For weeks pregnant, the baby is now growing very healthy. Mark and I looked at each other. I could read the deep joy in his eyes. As a first-time father, Mark takes care of every detail. He patiently asked the doctor about the taboos for pregnant women. In order to take better care of me, Mark hired an aunt. Most of the time, he works at home. Mark even prepares my nutritious meals himself. During the 2 months when I had the worst morning sickness, Mark lost more weight than I did. If I must say, Mark is almost a perfect husband. Seeing how hard it was for me to be pregnant, he hugged me with heartache. This is the only one. I don't want to have any more. I patted his head with a smile. Honey, do you want a boy or a girl? At that time, he gently took me into his arms. Boys and girls are fine. As long as it's yours, I like it. I smiled and didn't expose it. The last time he went crib shopping, Mark bought a bunch of little dresses for girls. I wanted to return it, but Mark refused. I don't know the gender of the baby yet. What if he can't wear it? It's okay, just keep it as a souvenir. A few months later, Mark and I's child was finally born. It's a girl. The moment he came out of the delivery room, Mark's eyes were red with tears. He kissed my sweaty forehead. Nancy, thank you for your hard work. He named our child Maggie. He said that his daughter must look more like me. Many years later, I leaned in Mark's arms. Why did you like me in high school? Because you are beautiful. I laughed and punched Mark on the shoulder. I would also kiss his cheek when he is angry and say, you are so cute. Mark kissed my forehead. My mother died when I was 8 years old. After she discovered my father's mistress, she was so distraught that she died in a car accident. At that time, I always hated my father and even felt that there was no point in living. I was dirty, got involved in gang fights, and had no skills. It wasn't until later that you appeared in my life that I had the idea of protecting a girl for the first time. Everyone is afraid of me, only you choose to get close to me regardless of everything. Listening to Mark reminiscing about the past, I sighed softly. If your mother knew that you are married now and have your own children. If she knew about this in the afterlife, she would definitely be very happy. Mark looked at the stars in the sky. Yeah, she'll be very happy. For a long time afterwards, Mark just held me quietly. After a long while, he suddenly called me. Thank you, Nancy, for choosing me. I moved in his arms and looked up at him. Mark, I should be the one thanking you. Thank you for loving me for so long. From the initial unexpected encounter to the current situation. Mark walked towards me with each determined step. This world is brilliant and great. Mark stood in the light and shadow and stretched out his hand to me. He smiled and said to me, Nancy, welcome to my world.